Second question from the floor will be asked by Jim Kuhn, a member of the Government and Taxation Standing Committee. After that, as always, we open up the meeting to questions from the floor from City Club members. There will be a microphone on the floor. If you have written questions you'd like to ask, instead of going up to the microphone, there are forms on your tables. And during or after the presentation of our two speakers, if you just hold those forms up and wave them to staff members at the staff table there, they'll come and collect them and bring them up to the head table. On to today's program. Why shouldn't it be legal? Sure, it was prohibited, even in the original Oregon Constitution of 1857, but the people who take part in it do so willingly and voluntarily. They aren't forced to do it. They know there are losers as well as winners, and after all, it gives people an outlet, some fun. Some may say it's immoral, but others don't really see it as a moral question one way or the other. If the people want it, let's legalize it. Of course, I'm referring to the practice of dueling. But naturally, all of the above pertains as well to the Oregon State Lottery. Our Constitution still prohibits, in these words, lotteries and the sale of lottery tickets for any purpose whatever. The Constitution authorizes penal laws to enforce the prohibition on such socially undesirable acts as lotteries, but since 1984, the people of Oregon have put our state into the lottery business. And the people have played the lottery, with their losses supporting economic development and creating a fund on which many a budgeting legislator has cast covetous eyes over the years. More recently, the controversy over video poker has spawned new acrimony and an Attorney General's warning that special interests and organized crime lurk in the shadows of those video poker machines. Has Oregon become addicted to gambling? But on the other hand, if folks are having fun and the government is making money, is it such a bad thing anyway? Here today to give two sides of the issue are James Davey, Director of the Oregon State Lottery, and Mike Burton, Assistant to the President at Merrillhurst College and State Representative from North Portland in the Oregon Legislature. Jim Davey is a specialist in computer services. He worked in the state's Executive Department, Data Services Division, and the Department of Revenue Administrative Services Division before joining the Oregon Lottery as Assistant Director or Deputy Director at its inception in 1985. He has been Director of the Oregon State Lottery since 1986. He is active in several national and international North American public lottery associations. Mr. Davey and his wife have two grown daughters and they live in Salem. Mike Burton has represented the North Peninsula area of Portland in the legislature since 1985. As you probably know, in the 1991 legislative session, he was a leading critic of video poker and of the lottery's expansion into new areas of games. Mr. Burton is a retired Air Force officer, I learned. He has master's degrees in business and education and a doctor's degree in history. We have two well-qualified people to talk about a hot topic this afternoon. Without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Representative Mike Burton.
In March of this year, Oregon will begin operating 7,500 video slot machines. We will become dealers in the biggest gambling game in this state's history. I think it's a bet we shouldn't make, and I'd submit that it is bad and ill-conceived public policy. The voters in 1984, as already been mentioned, established the lottery under the Oregon Constitution. That measure did several things, two of which I want to call your attention to today. It said that 16% of the revenues could be used for the administration of the lottery, and the balance, 84%, would be used for public good. Traditionally, that means that 50% of the revenues have gone to prizes, and the balance, 34%, was supposed to come to the legislature for economic development. Indeed, we haven't ever fully received the 34%, but that's where the money is supposed to go. But there's another section in the Constitution that was approved by the voters. Subsection 7 says that the Legislative Assembly has no power to authorize and shall prohibit casinos from operation in the state of Oregon. So how is it that Oregon now finds itself on the verge of expanding gambling options to include poker, keno, manual slot machines, sports betting, and who knows what else? How did we get here? I think it's because of a fundamental weakness in our government and a quest for easy money. First, let me make some disclaimers and state a couple of biases of my own. I grew up in a home with a compulsive gambler. My father wasted thousands of dollars in the back rooms of a fraternal lodge until we literally lost the farm. I realize that people will gamble, and that some, regardless of how we regulate it, will compulsively gamble and potentially bring great social stress on themselves and their families. But I don't think the public has yet come to realize what the nature of this new to Oregon form of gambling is. The lottery, I believe, as I believe people envisioned it in instituting it in 1984, was a passive game. There's no instant gratification from the lottery. It's something that you buy tickets on Wednesday and Saturday, or you get the daily 4 games, and that's it. Video slots and Keno are far different games. Keno games occur every 5 minutes and keep the 7-Eleven stores and the taverns busy. Bets can be made in multiples of $1 to $20. Now think for a minute and ask yourself, how much money do you think Oregonians have put into the Keno machines in the first 17 weeks of operation? Some of you might think $1 million, $2 million. In fact, they've spent $27 million. $27 million in 17 weeks in pocket change on Keno. That's the same amount that would pay for efforts to extend health benefits to the 400,000 Oregonians who currently have no health coverage. And with video slots, the stake is even greater. The Nevada Gambling Commission in studies has shown that video slots are the most addictive form of gambling, and has described it to be, to the video slot player, what the crack is to the cocaine addict. It is particularly addictive to women who prefer to play alone. Is it the money? Not really. It's the machines and the game itself that causes the addiction. Consider this. In Las Vegas in 1980, slot machines, mechanically operated slot machines, could be played once every 6 minutes and accounted for about 30% of the take of the casinos. By 1990, new technology with electronic machines allowed a play every 4 seconds and accounted for almost 80% of the take at the casinos. Beyond these concerns, however, is for me as a legislator, the greater concern about the state becoming more and more reliant on gambling proceeds as a source of income. This is essentially a regressive tax. And as it becomes a greater percentage of state spending, it becomes even worse public policy. And since the revenues from lotteries have generally been failing or gone flat, the commission, the Lottery Commission, is constantly looking for new ways to hook in new players, as the legislature demands more money, so no one can escape culpability. Does this make sense? In a September 1991 editorial, a monthly magazine called First Things said, "In a democracy, the need for popular consent to tax is a powerful check on government growth and irresponsibility. A government that raises money by encouraging and exploiting the weaknesses of its citizens escapes the democratic mechanisms of accountability. As important, state-sponsored gambling undercuts the civic virtue upon which democratic governance depends." The question then again is this good public policy? In 1984, the state was in a severe recession, and that may very well explain why the voters were willing to support a lottery which would be used for economic development. In the 1985 legislative session, the first year of the lottery, Senator L.B. Day introduced a bill which would have set state lottery proceeds aside for 5 biennia, for 10 years. He asked me to co-sponsor that bill, and I willingly agreed. The idea was that we would set that money aside in trust, and then after 10 years we would work off the interest from that bill. We'd have a better idea what the kind of consistency of those revenues would be, and we'd make some clear-cut decisions on what we wanted to spend that money on. We went up for our first hearing, and Senator Day, I was a freshman legislator, leaned over to me and he says, "You know, this is the only chance we're going to have this bill heard." And I said, "Why? It's a good idea. It's good public policy." And he said, "You know, you got a lot to learn." He said, "Because when it comes to spending money, the legislature has no discipline." And that's very true. We had one hearing and we set it aside. If we had done what Senator Day wanted to do in 1985, by 1995 that trust fund would be over $1 billion, and we would be earning in interest double what we make right now from the regular lottery. And I should say this, that this amount of money is coming in spite of the fact that the Commission overspent its own administrative budget by $3.6 million in 1986, and in 1990 it was overspent its budget, its administrative budget, by $588,000. Unfortunately, the legislature has no oversight authority of the lottery, of either its budget or its policies. By 1989 session, the frenzy for lottery money was really on. Governor Goldschmidt, who had earlier expressed opposition to gambling, in the last days of the session supported sports lottery and video poker games. In spite of this, the legislature did not approve the games in 1989. We were in fact told by the Attorney General that the lottery could establish any games it wished within the constitutional constraints, so the legislature reluctantly established accounts to receive the money from those games. Video slots, however, did not go into effect as various counties, especially Multnomah County, indicated opposition. Then in 1991, House Bill 3151 was introduced. This bill was aimed at a perceived crime problem, the so-called gray games. There are or were about 5,000 to 8,000 video slot or video poker games around the state. They're legal. They were legal. The problem was that some were paying off in cash, which is illegal. And I think rightfully that was perceived to be a widespread problem. So the legislature declared it a felony for anyone to possess or have these machines after December the 1st, 1991. Then an amendment was added to the bill, and the amendment exempted the state from that same crime that we had just created. And that's why we're in the game today. This was done at the last minute of the session, and a feeding frenzy resulted from that action. The lottery budget became a central debate of the session. Certain activities which had been funded in the original lottery budget from regular lottery funds were placed on a restricted list to receive funding only if video slots were approved. Organizations such as the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, the Oregon Trail Association found themselves faced with having to support video slots if they were going to get their 1991-93 funding. Remember, in the original lottery budget, these activities were funded, but leadership had other designs on the use, and the lottery had to revise its forecast down because of decreased revenues and sales. Essentially, it was a game of blackmail. Play ball with video slots or no money for your favorite piece of pork. Deals were cut all over the Capitol. The supporters even tried to say that gambling addiction was economic development. Senate Bill 567, and I'll quote this from Section 96, said, "The Legislative Assembly finds and declares gambling-related addictive behavior may impose additional costs on state government and the state economy, such as additional mental health expenditures, increased law enforcement, and lost economic output. The use of a portion of net receipts from video lottery games to pay the cost of treating addictive behavior promotes the creation of jobs and the state's economic development by offsetting and treating the negative consequences of the state's encouragement and promotion of increased gambling." What was at stake? The state would get, as it said, about $50 million a year net from video slots. How do we get to $50 million in net income? Well, there's about 2 million eligible players in Oregon, that is people over 21. We assume that maybe 25% of those will play in a given year, that's 500,000. Each person would have to lose $1,000 each to get to that net. The Commission estimates that the gross in this income would be about $200 million a year. The other $150 million goes to prizes and to administrative expenses. Since they intend that the payoff on these machines will be, for every $10 that's put in it, $9 will go back in prizes. So you get a 10% there. You're going to have a handle in the game in a given year to get to $200 million gross of $2 billion. It's a great deal of money, and it creates a great deal of temptation. What's the experience in other states? South Dakota adopted this scheme, and after 2 years, the results are coming in. Bad check rates are up 65% in that state, bankruptcies are up 34%, and Gamblers Anonymous membership is up 200%. The real question is, has the economy of South Dakota improved at the same time? Are there more automobile dealerships? Is there an expansion of industry? Has there been a diversification of the economics of that state? Perhaps it's too early to tell, but the real answer at this point is no. The government has a few easy dollars, but it puts the responsibility on the public for providing services on the backs of just a few people and makes the decision makers more dependent on those who control gambling money. And who controls it? The corruption and criminal activities have already been alluded to here. around the gambling industry, and I think they're almost legendary. The point was not lost on the Lottery Commission, which asked the Attorney General and the state police to report the matter. The result was a large document detailing the ills and the possible corruption that occurs in gambling. The Commission acted wisely by deciding to run the games themselves. But even GTEC, which runs our current lottery and Keno games, has been implicated in a sensational political corruption scandal in California. What should we do about this? I think there's 4 things minimally that we could do. First, sign and vote for an initiative filed by former Governors Atiyeh and Straub, which would limit the lottery to its original games. That initiative will be out on the streets next week. Support legislation which will allow the legislature to oversight the Lottery Commission, both its policies and its administrative budget. Third, place lottery revenues into a central fund to pay for capital construction and maintenance of public schools, a basic service which the state provides, and thus reducing the possibility of porking. Fourth, ask the governor to delay, as she has said she would, the implementation of video slots until the matter has been cleared from the courts, or until the people have had a chance to publicly debate this issue and hear all sides. In a copyrighted article by I. Nelson Rose, a leading national attorney who works for Indian tribes in establishing casinos, including Oregon now, has noted that virtually all of the spread of the fastest forms of gambling have come without the express approval of the general public, and so it goes in Oregon. At a time when respect for government has reached what may be an historic low, it is profoundly discouraging to see the state rushing to capitalize on personal and civic corruption. Or as others have said, when the states playing croupier and hustler talk about the dignity of government, invites only derision, and it's sad to say derision well-deserved. We need different answers to the problems in Oregon than playing hustler at the gaming tables in Oregon. There's still time to stop this rush into a bad public policy decision, and I hope you'll join me and help make that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Burton. I know I'm mischaracterizing your comments if one gets the impression that we're a state of crazed gambling addicts, but if anyone did get that impression, let me present our next speaker, who I think has a slightly differing view, Jim Davey, the director of the Oregon State Lottery.
Thank you very much. When they invited me to this meeting and I had somebody call back, they said, and I think we had accepted, I said, sure, I'd like to talk to that group. And they said, oh, by the way, Mike Burton will be there and you guys will probably be debating each other. And that set me back a little bit. I said, well, I'm no match for Mike Burton in a debate. He does this more often than I do. And they said, came to me the other day and they said, well, if it gets too tough, just do what the president would do, get the flu. But I'm going to try to tough it out here. I don't know if Mike made it clear, but our job at the lottery, and if you read into the Constitution that Mike was looking at, is to raise money for economic development and the creation of jobs in Oregon. And we do that by developing and marketing lottery games. And Mike also mentioned that it gets pretty intense when the revenues are down. I probably can remember more than once when people didn't get as much money as they thought from the lottery, and my phone rings off the hook. It probably rings off the hook more when the funds aren't there than we start a new game. So there is a lot of pressure to generate this money, and I think for a lot of good reasons. Certainly we at the lottery, I and the commission staff, are concerned about some people that may have compulsive gambling tendencies, and I know there are people that have these. But in trying to research this and find out how many people have these tendencies, we made a heck of a lot of calls and research in the state, and just to find a number that people could call for help. And we didn't find a significant problem in Oregon. And to say that the numbers are up 200% in South Dakota, I think it would be important to find out how many compulsive gamblers they had that made up that 200%. when I look at Oregon, I have trouble identifying, and I have never had, and it's kind of startling to me, somebody call me and say, Jim, my husband, somebody in my family has lost the paycheck playing your games. What are you going to do about that? That hasn't happened in 6 years, and I take all my calls. What I do know is that the money we've raised has created or saved 28,000 jobs, and I can look at the statistics and say that Oregon's unemployment of its workforce is greater than 6%, and it's pretty easy to figure out how many people are there that don't have jobs. I can also look at loggers, lumber people that, not because they were gambling, not for any other reason, but either their plant was automated, moved, or they can't get timber to cut, or out of a job. And I do know that $15 million in the next 2 years is going to help retrain those folks to diversify the economies in the areas they come from. I do know that in the next 10 years, provided we're still around and we can operate our games, that over $100 million will be going to develop a light rail system out to the west side, $16 million of that this year. I can look across the river at the new convention center, which part of that was funded by lottery dollars, $15 million. I can look around at our campuses and look at engineering, science, administrative buildings to the tune of probably $30 or $35 million that were funded with lottery dollars. I know that when the system is fully implemented, we will have an educational network, EdNet, that will deliver educational programs to remote areas to train our young people and anyone else in the area. $8 million lottery project. And I've also learned from this job that people in Oregon and everywhere else like to gamble. We, up until December 1st, were the second largest gambling game and organization in this state. For many, many years, video poker was operated pretty much unharassed in everywhere except the city of Portland throughout the state. And we estimate that there was 5,000 to 6,000 video poker machines in bars and taverns throughout the state, generating in excess of $100 million that was going into the pockets of those operators. And anyone that's been around these machines will know that this is pretty much a cash operation, and it makes you wonder how much of that money ever found its way into even our tax system, let alone our economic development programs. So when the legislature was presented with a bill for video poker, that bill was presented by the Oregon Sheriff's Association. That bill says, once and for all, give us some help. We want to get rid of these machines. And they simply wanted to make the machine illegal, which wasn't, and they wanted to make possession of that machine a felony. I was there when that bill was presented. I had no plans to testify on that bill, but I knew that I would testify. That's why I was there. I knew that I would be asked to testify. And I would have been perfectly happy to never testify on that bill and have the legislature pass a bill that says nobody's going to run video poker, because not only was it major illegal gambling in the state, it was robbing money from these programs that we at the lottery support. People could go play video poker, which frankly has a much higher percentage payout than our lottery games, and they could avoid our lottery games. So I would liken getting rid of video poker in my position to Lee Iacocca coming back from Japan and saying the Japanese aren't going to be allowed to sell cars here anymore. That's how big a significant competitor video poker was in this state. And our police force was spending a tremendous amount of time running down these games when they had plenty of, in my opinion, I think there's higher priority things to do. So I would have been happy just to clean that up. But during that, after the sheriffs testified, which didn't take a long time, I was immediately asked to come up by the chairman of that committee to testify on how much video poker could make for the state of Oregon. And I'm glad that Mike clarified, we make the money at the lottery, we earn it for the state, and there's, in my mind, some intense pressure to make sure we keep those earnings up. The legislature decides how that money is going to be spent. We have discretion over how much money we put into the games. We can pay out more than 50%, which means there's less than 34% for the state. But in our minds, and I think we can prove that if you give players a better deal in the lottery, they're going to play a little more and the state gets more money. So we've tried to argue with legislators not to look at 34%, but look how much money we can deliver back to you. Mike is right about the 16%. The lottery did in 1986 or 1987 go over the 16%. When I became director, we made some significant cost reductions. We changed that, and I, at some other time, will debate him about the 600,000 that he claims we went over in 1991, which I don't think we did. So from our perspective at the lottery, we see this money doing some tremendous work, and while we generate $50 million now, if we want to keep video poker around, that's probably going to go to an excess of $100 million annually. If the games perform like they do other places, could be $250 million a year that the lottery can pump into the state's economy to solve known problems. I agree with Mike. The voters, if they have a chance to vote on this, I think they should be the ones to decide whether or not we continue to operate this game. But as long as our job is to develop money, earn money for the state, we will continue to look at lottery games. A lot of people have a real problem with the Keno game. I'd ask any of you to open the dictionary when you go home today and look at the definition of Keno. My dictionary says a lottery game like bingo or lotto. We never had any idea that we'd get the reaction from Keno that we got, because to us it's like any other numbers game. People say, but you can play every 5 minutes. I don't know if you were around when we started our instant scratch ticket games, but there's plenty of people that could scratch a lot more than 5 times a minute, or in 5 minutes, and you can go through a lot of games of the scratch ticket. So we didn't look at that in the same category as the video poker games. I would agree that video poker games to some people are going to be more enticing. There's probably going to be more money put into them, and we have to take some precautions to guard against that. The legislature, in their wisdom, set aside 3% of funds for compulsive gamblers. Currently in the state, there is no money available, to my knowledge, state money or local money to help compulsive gamblers. There will be now. We will be, and at the suggestion of Representative Burton, putting a phone number where you can call, and I believe it's an 800 number, if you feel like you need some help with your gambling problems, so we can start providing some assistance to compulsive gamblers. I think without the 3% and without us taking that initiative, you would still have, and if we weren't here, plenty of compulsive gamblers, like you have plenty of drug-addicted people, like you have plenty of alcohol-addicted people. Unfortunately, these people don't get much help or much attention. I think to emphasize that fact, when people learned that the legislature had set aside money for compulsive gamblers, we had more than one call of organizations that treat alcohol and drug addictions saying, can we use that money for these programs, because we don't have enough money, and frankly, we don't have the compulsive gambling problem to the extent that we will have the money, and they want to use the money for other issues. So I guess to end, over the next 2 years, the lottery will make a significant dollar contribution to the state. This year we will have our most successful year, with or without video poker. And next year, obviously, if video poker's around, our earnings will probably be in excess of $100 million to go into the state's economy and help people with problems we know about, people that don't have jobs, people that can't find money to start a business, money to do infrastructure so we can keep our seaports and airports up to date, money to retrain people for jobs so we can put people to work in this state. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. I am told we have to pull these microphones fairly close to our faces in order to be heard and picked up on the radio and in the audience, so if you do that, gentlemen, thank you. First question will be asked by Lloyd Anderson, board host.
Mike, with all of this money that's being spent in such a worthwhile fashion, what would you do if you had your druthers and cut off all lottery money and then had to appropriate other monies to finance it? Where would it come from? New taxes, sales tax, what?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure I made it clear what I said about the initiative. The initiative doesn't eliminate the lottery. The initiative takes the lottery back to what I think the original intent was. And the things that Jim has mentioned here, and that the money's been used for, the convention center and all these things, I'm not arguing that a great deal of that isn't worthwhile. I think there's some real problems about the way the legislature has allocated some of the lottery money, in the sense that we're creating a lot of duplication of effort that will begin to build the bureaucracy that'll have to be used for general fund down the road. But the fact is, a lot of that money and all the things that Jim has mentioned was done with the money that came in from the regular lottery. The thing is that we're going into a whole new phase of type of gambling, and that's the video poker. We're going to essentially be creating, I feel, and there's a debate, I'm sure that Jim would disagree with me, and it's a matter that's in the court right now, that we have essentially established casino-style gambling. By the time you put in the video slots and the various forms that'll come in with, the Keno games, blackjack tables, which is a local option now down the coast, and all of those types of things, along with the tavern style of play, what you'll find is you'll have a series of gambling casinos. That's what's occurred in Montana and South Dakota, where they have it. The cafes and things have literally changed their names to casinos. That's a decision I think Oregonians ought to make. But the revenues that already comes in from the lottery, and we could argue about that, but there is no intent on my part, nor on the filers of that initiative, to change the regular lottery. And the good that's come from the lottery money on doing infrastructure things is and the things that Jim has mentioned came off of our regular lives. We seem to be doing okay. If you call and talk to various state lottery directors about the attitude that some certain states have about this, there's a lot of state lottery commissions that will say, we figure there's a sort of a certain number of lottery players out there, and it's going to be a portion of our revenue, and that's it. We're just going to count it as a revenue stream. But Oregon has become addicted to it. The legislature's become addicted to it. And Jim mentioned that. The pressure to increase the amount of money, the pressure to go after that as a form of public policy money, I think is destructive. I would rather sit down, or try to sit down with Oregonians and say, maybe instead of spending $27 million in pocket change on Keno, you'd be willing to talk about some equitable distribution of that money back through the public system to pay for some of our public needs.
Mr. Davey, you want to respond to that?
I guess I would just respond to the fact that other lottery directors say they may be getting a certain amount of money from their lotteries, but I'd also point out that the Oregon lottery is in the lower 1/3 of per capita earnings from lotteries. So it's pretty easy for the East Coast lottery director to say, don't start more games, when in Massachusetts they're doing $1.6 billion a year in sales compared to Oregon's $150 million. They're getting $5.30 a week per capita, when Oregon is getting $1.30 a week per capita. And it's only because they've added games over the years like we're doing now.
Mr. Davey, Jim Cairn, member of City Club, member of the Government Taxation Committee. What statistical analysis, if any, is available by zip code area or other such breakdown which gives some indication of the amount of money spent on the lottery on a per capita basis? And if so, are the people in low-income areas spending more money on a per capita basis than people in high-income areas?
I'm glad you asked that question, and I don't have the breakdown by zip code, but we could get that very easily because we keep track of, obviously we know where our retailers are and how much they're selling. I've got some charts here that I won't drag out, but it will show you that we get a lower percentage of our income from what we classify as low income, which is under $10,000 a year, than any other category of the lottery. We get 4% of our revenue from those individuals. Most of our revenue comes from middle income, lower income, or underrepresented. If you go on the other side of the scale, you'll you'll see that those people that can most afford it are playing the lottery more. This is the hardest and worst myth. Everybody, no matter where they shop, and in my neighborhood, I don't think there's a whole lot of poor people. They always say, when I go to the store, Jim, I see all these poor people playing. I watch these people that come back into the lottery winning prizes, and believe me, they come from various professions, normally always have a job or retired. They drive good cars, so people aren't spending their last dollar for the most part on the lottery. The average expenditure is under $4 a week. And even Mike would say this $27 million that's went into the lottery from Keno since we started, I remind him and my staff that 61% of that went back in prizes. So it's, most of it, or a great deal of it, is money that's churning through the system.
The only trouble with that 61% is that I don't get any of it. The thing of it is that, Mike, I agree with your statement here that what we're really talking about here is this good or is this bad public policy? And because we could just bring all kinds of diatribes in on lotteries, upon gambling of all sorts, because it's nothing new. It's been going on for ages and ages and ages. But one thing that interests me very much, and that is the statement you made, that the legislature has no oversight upon the operation of the lottery. I believe that's what you said. And with the type of an activity that it is, which historically has always attracted the criminal element and the gang element in this country, and some of them which are very, very, very powerful, is an easy way to make lots of money.
Could we have the question, please?
Pardon?
Could you get to the question, please? We have a lot of people.
That's what I'm trying to do. I would suggest that I'd like to know who has oversight upon our lottery commission, not as if there's anything wrong with Mr. Davey. I've just got to say that I don't think he should have that total responsibility. And I think that the state needs to be able to come up at some point and say, hey, what the heck's going on here? And do you have that now?
He used to pull my teeth, so I know how painful this can be. The Attorney General in 1985 issued an opinion that essentially said that the lottery's budget, that's their internal administrative budget, was not subject to legislative review. And in fact, in the AG's opinion, it likens the Lottery Commission to what it calls a fifth branch of government, if you count the media as the fourth, I guess. And says that there's really sort of hands-off. I think that opinion was limited to the particular piece of legislation that was in place at the time, but it's become essentially traditional since then that there's really no oversight. Now, in fact, the governor, under the Constitution, appoints Mr. Davey and the members of the commission. I don't know how much influence the governors have felt on this, but the current governor has indicated that she really wasn't very much in favor of this, but has not directed the lottery, as far as I know, to not proceed with the games, even though these games are in court. So I would say that oversight authority is pretty limited. I think the legislature should review the budget and approve it, just like it does every other agency of the state. And in fact, that budget will have something to do with the effect of its policies. As you know, often it's not the way it should be. Policy should be in front of budget, but often in this state, its budget is ends up reflecting policy. So I think that's the way to get at that. It should occur.
Mr. Davey, a pretty political question. Are you ready to take that one on?
I think Mike's absolutely right. The governor and the commission have oversight over us. We also have some pretty strict constitutional limitations, and I think the people that drafted the lottery law specifically wanted it that way, and I think that was because the lottery is a market-driven organization, and I think in their opinion state government wouldn't do a very good job of running a market-driven organization, particularly when they were looking at the budget expenditures that many of you are in marketing that you would think offensive if a state agency was spending money to hire King Kong to hang on a building to introduce a new lottery would be a waste of taxpayers' money, when in fact we have to market these games to generate the interest and the money.
You see, that's a good argument for privatization.
Well, that's the other argument that
I haven't seen the governor's task force come up. They haven't suggested that with the OLCC, but maybe they'll do that with the lottery next.
Well, that's an argument I hear from some state officials is we don't market liquor. My response is you don't have to. Every football player that's done playing or every coach that's done coaching is on TV every weekend marketing the product that we're taxing. You could privatize the lottery. I don't think that would be good, but you would still be taking the money but hiding behind a private organization that was doing exactly what you might not agree with we should be doing anyway.
Yes, Arnold Kogan, member of City Club. I'd like to have the two speakers clarify the Oregon constitutional ban on casino gaming, particularly in light of the fact that Oregon already offers a number of games, many of which are available in most 7-Eleven stores in the state. And my understanding of casino is that I suppose every 7-Eleven could be considered a mini casino. And so I'd appreciate your clarification of that ban.
Well, from my perspective, I would agree with you. That matter is being argued in the courts and is on appeal right now. And the challenge, the word casino, as far as I understand it, hasn't really been defined in Oregon. It's in the Constitution. The word is used, but the definition of a casino is not there. Casino games, however, are defined in the statutory law, and it includes slot machines, video or poker rather, or anything played in that sense. So those are considered casino games under statutory law. And that debate is going on right now. The irony of this, to some extent, is the current situation going on right now with the Indian tribes. And you may have read in the Oregonian this morning that the Cow Creek Band is looking for land to expand into a casino operation. And in that article, if you read it carefully, the tribal head of the Cow Creek is very careful not to use the word casino, and says the reason that she doesn't use that, obviously, is that those are prohibited under the Oregon Constitution. So there's some matters going on right now about that definition, and I would suppose, and the Lottery Commission and Jim has made it very clear on a number of occasions that his view is that these are other lottery games. I think we disagree fundamentally on that question, and that'll have to ultimately be decided by the courts. The outcome of that will determine whether or not the Indians will be able to expand into Class 2 type of gambling, and that's a federal classification in the state of Oregon. And we cannot prohibit the Indian tribes from doing anything that we do, and I wouldn't think that we should try to prohibit them from doing anything. But it will create a competitive market for Oregon's video slots.
I am not going to make an extensive comment on that. I happen to be a defendant in the court action, so it's probably not in my best interest to comment. I will say that it has gone through one court, and they have agreed with our position. These are not casinos, and it has been appealed.
Alan Oliver. The entity that doesn't seem to be mentioned much is the concessionaire. Could either or both of you elucidate the role of this company and what its profitability is and what kind of oversight the legislature has on it?
Mr. Davey, you want to take that one first?
I assume you mean by the concessionaire the people that are providing our games. We deal with two major groups. One are the people that provide the games, and if you talk to the company G-Tech, and I would think if you looked at their books, they haven't made a lot of money in Oregon. The games they offered initially, I think they underpriced and didn't do too well. With the advent of the Keno game, I think they are doing very well. I haven't seen an audit to see how much they're making, but you have to understand they have about 40 employees in Oregon. They do a lot of business in Oregon. A lot of that money that we pay them, which I would imagine last year was probably $3 million, is going right back into the Oregon economy. The other major group we do business with is Oregon retailers all over the state. And since we started in business, we paid over $47 million to people like 7-Eleven, Circle K, and Safeway, our retailers, in commissions to sell our games. And they would tell you they're not making any money.
The money really isn't made, and that's why there was such a battle over the so-called video poker games, or as I call them, video slot machines, because you can really, they're just electronic machines that can play any number of games on there. The money and the reason there was a lot of frenzy on that was the people who were going to be the middle person, And essentially the commission, by running the games themselves, have eliminated that middle person. So the retailers are out of that, and the state becomes the purveyor of this and then has somebody operate it. And given the kind of history that apparently surrounds these things, that's either good news or bad news. My fundamental point is that the state shouldn't be involved in this at all. This type of gambling. I mean, I make a strong differentiation what I consider to be lottery and what I consider to be this interactive type of gambling that goes on. The amount of dollars that are going to go through this type of gambling right now that's going to go on is very high, and the stakes were very high. The machines themselves cost $5,000 to $7,000 a machine. There's an initial investment to purchase those. That'll be $50 to $70 million investment by the state of Oregon to purchase these machines, and they'll probably come from companies outside the state. There is then the ongoing cost that goes on to this. On the stock market, I was being called, and I'm sure other people were who are involved in this daily, by Dean Witter in New York, asking what the status of the lawsuit is and so on and so forth, because they're trying to advise their investors as to whether or not to buy into the companies like International Games and others who potentially would have been purveyors of this, because their stocks are obviously marketed on the basis of what they're going to do on the outcome of this state alone, which is a small one. And if it goes here, it's going to go in other states.
Frank Munjum, City Club member. You've both said that the illegal payouts on video poker machines were a significant problem. My question to you would be, can you describe a solution to that specific problem that is better than having the state itself go into that business?
Yeah, we should have done what it did, and Portland never had a problem with it because they're just banned. I could never understand this problem. I mean, I understand the sheriffs trying to do where they are, and it's been going on for years and years. But for some reason, it suddenly became a major crime problem when there was an interest on the part of the purveyors of these machines and others to make it an even bigger problem. You know, if the sheriffs and the local counties wanted to solve the problem, they go to the county commission and say, let's ban them. If they're not here, you don't have the problem. That would have solved it. Easy way to do it. Easy way to do it.
I would agree with Representative Burton. We had a lot of people 2 years ago when we were going to offer this game tell us thanks but no thanks, and I think I challenged several county commissioners to say, well, if you're not going to let the state legal game operate, how about doing something about the illegal games? And on one council, I heard a council person say, well, the sheriff said they're not a big problem, so we don't need to do anything about it.
If you both agree we shouldn't have them, how come we do?
I didn't say we shouldn't have them. I said that would have been a solution. We have them. I don't know if it does a lot of good to speculate on them. If you want a game that's going to generate a lot of money for the state, which appeared to me and appeared to the Lottery Commission to be the intent of the legislation, you don't make it a felony to not have them. Give the lottery some guidelines how to run them and spend some money and expect the Lottery Commission to go away and say, I don't think they want us to do this. You know, we realize and we know there may be some constituents here that will get money from that. So, you know, our direction from the legislature, we thought, was to operate these games. And these will have, if they're not operated, in my opinion, a significant impact, which maybe people care or don't care, on our tavern and bar industry.
I mentioned in my remarks that Governor Goldschmidt had indicated an opposition initially to gambling, and my comments come from a meeting I had with him up in Mahonia Hall during the interim session between 1988 and 1989, when we were looking for a way to find funding to operate prisons, and he was going to put the money on the increase in the license plate fee, and I said, that's a totem in Oregon. You can't touch that thing. Good luck. But then I suggested that what we should do is go out and require all existing video machines to be put online and secured into the Department of Revenue and then taxed appropriately, which is the loss in tax revenues that Jim was talking about. If we're really going to have those machines out there and local jurisdictions still wanted to have them, fine. Let's make sure we're getting legitimate tax income from them by putting them online, and if they're not online, then they're illegal and destroy them. So there's a lot of simpler and better ways to have done it without even intruding into the existing situation as it was.
Dennis Cusack, City Club member. Mike, you mentioned briefly a comment about the relationship between video poker and organized crime, but you didn't get into it. Will organized crime be attracted to this state due to video poker? And I think a second question, was there any influence on the legislature from either that group or any other sort of undesirable interest groups?
Well, I don't know if anybody came to me in the legislature that had a badge on it and said, I'm a member of organized crime. Sometimes those are hard to identify. I think the Attorney General's report and the state police report is the one that I would refer you to as to what the extent of problems that occur. When you've got the kind of cash, Jim mentioned the fact these are all cash transactions, and when you've got millions and millions of dollars of cash transactions, the ability to manipulate or potentially corrupt that kind of situation is great. And certainly in the records of even the companies, and I think G-Tech is the best. But as I say, they've even got a problem down in California that may or may not be an issue. But the companies, the larger companies around, all have some problems in their background and this sort of thing. So what I did see in the legislature, and what's frightening to me, is the pressure that was brought about around this because of the money by legitimate lobbyists. Who were down. I heard one legislator in a conference committee on this issue simply say that to another legislator who was opposed to this, that if you want light rail, you better vote for this, or we're going to see you don't get it. It's that kind of thing that begins to occur that bothers me. If it's happening on that end in an open meeting by public officials, then what's going on that you don't see? And I think there is a record that is established about problems, and I just hope it doesn't come to Oregon. And I think, again, the Lottery Commission's decision to run these games themselves, even though I'm opposed to them, is the best way to assure that will be minimized. But I'm not too sure it'll be completely eliminated.
From our perspective, the lottery is taken, and the legislature did. The legislature set aside not only money for the compulsive gambling issue, but money for law enforcement. So there's money going back into local governments for law enforcement. Plus, they allocated some additional funds to the state police. The companies we do business with sometimes question whether they want to do business with us because we spend so much time going through their records, running down all their organizational connections, and even right down to the retailers. We're looking at bars and taverns. Who has ownership here? Where is your money coming from? Because there's a concern that an organized crime or some crime organization may come in and try to take over this business. We think we're taking the steps to prevent that, and obviously we don't think that'll ever happen, but we're certainly aware that it could.
Greg Kafuri. Mr. Davey, I'd like to extract a promise from you to make a greater effort to learn about gambling addiction. And to encourage you, let me share a little of my experience. I have spent some time in some of these bars where they have had video poker. I'm sure they virtually all pay off. What you'll find is a bar which has got 5 or 6 people in it. 4 or 5 will be playing these machines, and it ain't like Cheers. These people don't talk to anybody. They don't even drink. They just sit there, and it's them and the machine. And clients have told me, clients who felt that their lives were destroyed by these machines, that the machine sucks all your money, sucks all your self-respect, takes everything out of you, and you have nothing left. Will you make more of an effort to find out what it's like for these people?
Well, when you say make more of an effort, I think we are making that effort, and frankly, it hasn't been easy. But we aren't giving up. We have people that are working with, I believe it's the National Council on Compulsive Gambling, to try to learn more about it. We will be posting, if not on every machine, visibly in every location where you can get help. And if you can provide us with some information on that, we'd be glad to use it.
May I suggest you go to some of the states where they have video poker and talk to some of the people playing the machines, see if you can get their attention.
We have time for one more question.
Rodney Page, a member of the City Club. Senator Jeanette Hanby called the Attorney Generals of South Dakota and Montana that have video poker, and some of the statistics that Representative Burton alluded to earlier in his remarks were a part of the statistics that she got from those 2 Attorney Generals. But, Mr. Davies, if indeed we see huge rise in personal bankruptcies, insufficient check writings, spousal abuse, child abuse, and every other problem that our society is already heir to. Why would we want to compound the problems here in Oregon that many times over by selling our souls for a mess of pottage, so to speak, and have slot machines and video poker here in this state?
I've also talked to those people, and I don't always hear the same thing everybody else hears, and I haven't heard those stories. I've heard stories that it has had a lot of benefit in those states. Certainly there have been some problems. People I've talked to there say that these problems are not huge problems, that they're problems they can deal with. And I think if those problems occur here, I won't have to worry about it. I think people in the legislature, and while Representative Burton will say they don't have oversight, believe me, whenever they speak, we listen at the lottery and pay a lot of attention to what legislators say. And if it becomes a problem, I think if we don't act, they will.
I just a comment about that, the last comment, and I don't, people will gamble, as I said, and there are problems that I'm very critically and personally aware of. I do wish that the Commission and the legislature would pay more attention to this aspect of that problem. Indeed, we've spent a tremendous amount of time looking at the security aspects of the games going into place. I've seen the forms that the tavern owners and the people who are going to get this have to go through. I've had complaints about that, and I've said, tough luck, get in it or get out. So there's a tremendous amount of looking at that side of it. But the studies that Jim is talking about are phone calls that a staffer has made around other states. I really think we need to have somebody looking at this full well as to what's going to happen. The experience in those states and those numbers that have increased, the percentages may be larger than the numbers themselves, but an increase of one person whose life is destroyed as a result of this is not something that I want to say we can put on the backs of government. So I think it's worthwhile to take every possible step that we can to look at what the potential destructive aspects of this is. And I'm concerned particularly because I looked at a couple of studies recently about where gambling has gone in on Indian lands. And those tribes are particularly vulnerable to lots of things. And it's not to demean those tribes, but going into this and their relationship with the federal government and the bypassing of state regulatory aspects of this has created a lot of problems there, and we're going to have those problems here in Oregon.
Well-informed speakers, a high level of dialogue, good questions from City Club members. Jim Davey, Mike Burton, thank you both very much. We are adjourned.